We'll discuss completeness and timeliness and what that looks like, validation rules and validation notifications, different types of outlier analysis, including based on standard deviations, as well as this minimum and maximum outlier analysis. We'll also talk about predictive analytics and how we can apply this for the purposes of reviewing data quality. And then we'll also just briefly touch on the WHO data quality tool, which some of you might be familiar with, some of you might not be, but we're happy to also discuss that in more detail later on as well. So just as a group, since you're all here, we're talking about data quality, I just want to do a very simple exercise with you all, okay? So what we're going to try and do is identify the outlier based on the visualization that I'm showing. And you can either say it aloud or just think to yourself. So have a look at this chart. And I know it's kind of hard to see, but even with what you can see, what do you guys think are the outliers on this chart? Are there any? So you guys are all able to identify. I can hear you pointing and saying, doing one of this with your hands, right? It's very easy to see, right, that these are potentially suspicious values, right? These are outliers that might need investigation. And this is just a very simple chart, right? A very simple line chart showing our data over the last several months, right? The different values. And we can really quickly identify that these are potential values that we might want to check on. That's not a hard exercise, and it's not hard to train somebody to review something like this and review it regularly, right? The whole point of this is that we don't need to make it extremely complicated to do this, but there are some simple tools. There are some challenges with that, and I'll discuss that in a moment. But the idea is, we try to make this as simple as we can because it really helps us in reviewing our quality. What about this one? This is dropout rates for DPT3 to DPT1, or Penta 1 to Penta 3, whatever you guys happen to be using. Can you guys spot the issue here? Some of you are kind of giving me this look like, So this one's a bit tougher, I guess, right? So sometimes it can be very simple, like our last one. Sometimes we need to understand a little bit more about the data. This one, I didn't even mention what variable we were looking at. There's a number of variables at the bottom, but you can't really see them. But you can just automatically kind of tell, okay, the ones that are really high, maybe there's a problem. For this one, we're looking at dropout rate, and sometimes we require that program-specific knowledge or context to kind of apply this into practice. So this is for immunization, and actually, these negative ones here, so these are negative values, negative dropout rates. It's really not correct. Typically, this means that the amount of DPT3 or Penta 3 is more than the amount of DPT1 administered. So you might have some challenges there when you're classifying the information at the facility level. So sometimes, as you kind of get into this, you see it can be a bit more challenging. Oh, this one you can't really see the colors, huh? Okay, so I'm going to skip this one because it's too hard to see. Okay, so the idea is that there are visualizations that can really help us in spotting some obvious issues with the data. Sometimes it requires some program-specific knowledge. Sometimes, we can just really quickly spot these issues. And the idea is to make it as simple as possible, at least for this first-line level of support, right? Because often when we refer to data quality, it becomes this very large exercise in reviewing data quality, maybe on an annual basis. Some external person might come in and review all of your data together, submit a large report. It's very difficult to understand. It's very hard to act upon those issues in a subsequent way. So there are a number of things we can do to do this on a more routine basis and make this a little bit easier on people. So I think that a lot of these features that we will be discussing are not just meant to be done on an annual or maybe 2-year basis where we have this big exercise on reviewing all the data quality in the system. That is very time consuming, first of all. And secondly, it ends up, the report can be sometimes challenging to interpret and actually act upon. Whereas if you're kind of proactively looking into your issues on a more routine basis, then you can deal with these items well before they become, a big problem. It's not true for everything, of course. This might be limited to a subset of information, but it's still possible to do. Right? And you could see sometimes, especially, items like this, it's very easy to kind of train somebody on a monthly basis. Can you just look at this chart? And if there's a value that's really high, can you inform us? Or, you can come up with some very simple guidance to allow that person to review their quality of information in the field. And you can even have, staff who are maybe just entering the data, even just review this on a more routine basis if these are available to them. And then, of course, with the program-specific knowledge and skills, you might have to discuss this in a little bit more detail, right? It really explain what the programs, bring in experts who can kind of know what these indicators represent, and kind of discuss why this is a problem. Probably it's a problem within the facility itself. Okay. All right, so there are, it's quite hard to see on the screen. Let me just try to make it bigger. Still hard to see with the light. So what I'm showing here is that sometimes, though, these obvious challenges are not as obvious as they could be. So if you look at this data, there's small minor bumps in the information, but there's nothing kind of really crazy, right? We don't see this high variation from one value to the next, okay? And we kind of see this bigger bump here, but it's not so large compared to the previous value, right? So sometimes there's issues with kind of the sensitivity of the information. But if we look at this at a facility level, at a lower level, where it's not all aggregated, so this is all aggregated for the entire country, we can see here, for example, there's values like around 200, 300, and then all of a sudden there's this value, it's hard to see, but it's 33,000, right? So that is a big increase compared to our previous periods, and we're able to identify those outliers at a lower level. But the national total might be, very high. Maybe you're dealing with millions of people, especially for something like immunization or maybe antenatal care, where you have millions of people registered. Then, a small variation in 30,000 at the national level, that's not going to be so obvious, right? Whereas at the facility level, that's going to be much more problematic. So sometimes you have to look at your data at lower levels in your system, and we have a number of tools that support this. This is just looking at national totals year over year. Call this a year over year chart inside of DHIS2. So we can create that and put that on the dashboard, but it might not be as sensitive in picking up values at lower levels of the system if you are aggregating that up. It might be more useful to view those year over year values at the facility level or district level, and where you might pick up on these a little bit more. So scatter plots are also another visualization type that we have inside of DHIS2, and we can use this to identify outliers on a routine basis. So we can put this on dashboards, and we can, allow it to help us to really view extreme outliers in particular. So these are values that are just really too high or really too low compared to the other data that we have in our system, right? So once again, I apologize. The light makes it very hard to see, but this chart is subdivided into 4 quarters, and these top quarters are kind of our problematic areas, where it's saying that the values are just really high compared to our other data. They're not consistent with the other values that we have. So maybe you're not as familiar with this chart because it's in the newer versions of DHIS2, but it's a very nice way of identifying outliers and showing those outliers on your DHIS2 dashboard for further follow-up and action. So we can see, for example, this red, all the red values are kind of outliers theoretically, but really these ones that are way out here and way out here, very far off from the rest of our averages, from the rest of our previous values, these are quite problematic and would require further investigation. So it also allows you to prioritize a little bit. So you always might have some variation, but you're not going to maybe spend so much time on all these that are kind of more tightly knit or close together. Whereas these values that are very far off, they might require more investigation. And this is once again something else that is quite easy to train somebody to just view, even if they're not familiar with the entire kind of theory behind how this is calculated or made. But basically, you're just looking for these very far off values, and if there are any that might require some investigation, you might want to inform somebody who can look into this a bit more and determine kind of the direct cause of this problem. So all of these items that I've shown so far, they can all go on the DHIS2 dashboard. So it also might be for your consideration, if you don't already, to think about building data quality dashboards for various people to review. And of course, you can share those at multiple levels of your system. And different users will have access to kind of the different geography based on what they're viewing. All right, so completeness and timeliness. This is a feature that DHIS2 has supported for a very long time, right? In data entry for aggregate values. Kevin will actually talk a bit more about timeliness of tracker data in his presentation and just show you a bit more what that might look like. Once again, I apologize. It's quite hard to see for those of us in this room, but there's a lot of variation in these lines. This is just the number of reports being submitted. So you can already tell there's some kind of problem or issue with the data. So like if I were to look at a national total and every month I have a different number of facilities reporting, I mean, the values are probably not that accurate, right? Because we see big spikes, we see them go down again, up again. It's just all over the place, right? So when this is the case, it kind of, makes reviewing the data a bit more difficult or challenging. And, you might want to kind of try to figure out with those facilities, what's going on. Of course, we also have routine rates that we can calculate. You can see, for example, it's sometimes quite obvious when there's a problem, when the rate just kind of dips. And there might be a reason behind that, of course, some service outages or things of that nature. But if there's not, it might warrant investigation. So all of this, these measures that I'm showing here, they can be calculated automatically by DHIS2. I'm just using a very simple feature set for aggregate data values. Validation rules is another tool that we have inside of DHIS2. Now, these are features that are supported, but remember, none of these are configured out of the box. You have to kind of apply them to your own data sets when you're actually reviewing this information. And at least with aggregated values, you can also do this with tracker data by aggregating those values and comparing the aggregation, at least over different periods of time that you would like to see. And of course, all of these validation analyses have quite a bit of information that you can obtain from them to determine, give more information to the users that are reviewing this information, provide more information to yourself to be able to subsequently follow up on this information. Validation notifications is another feature tied to those validation rules. So we can actually, anytime there's some type of issue with your consistency, and let's say your number of malaria tests is greater than your number of suspected cases, for example, which shouldn't be the case, then you could send out a notification of some kind via email, via SMS, or also using the DHIS2 internal system, but that might not be so helpful in all cases. So usually for people who aren't regularly logging into the system, this can be quite useful. Of course, you don't want to overwhelm them, right? Because then they'll just start ignoring all these messages, okay? But you want to be kind of careful and targeted to make sure that only the most critical issues are the ones that are kind of being sent out. But you can use various thresholds and various calculations to compare your internal consistency or even your external consistency with other data sources to be able to create these notifications that are then sent out to people so they can check on the data or maybe inform the right person to perform specific follow-up actions. DHIS2 also has quite a fair amount of outlier detection suites, and these are built on a couple of different methods. So, the first was kind of the scatter plot. There are one method to use to detect outliers. We don't have to get into the statistics right now, but we also support this here as well, where we can get information on the different outliers that are detected based on a comparison of previous values and a certain kind of stratification or let's say a comparison of the data with previous values or with values from other periods, just to determine the consistency of those values overall. So there's quite a large feature set that you can implement to support this overall. We can also use predictive analytics in support of our data quality. So I'm going to try and move through this a little slowly, just so I can kind of explain, what I'm trying to get across here. So I know it's kind of hard to see once again. I apologize for that. If you look, this is a value for ANC1 visits, okay? And I just showed it by facility. And if I look at it over many months, my values are between 50 and 200-ish, okay? So there's not a ton of huge variation. Some of these hospitals have higher values compared to the facilities. That's expected if we look at their previous trends, all right? So what I'm gonna do, all I'm gonna do is sort the table, okay? So now I've sorted the table and we see some values, like this is 25,000 in comparison to the last month, which was 28. We have 28, 28, 34, 28, 22, 18, just kind of goes on and on. They're very small values, right? And we have some other instances of this. If we look here, we have 1,000, more than 1,000 reported, but that's fairly consistent because the other values are within this range. So what we want to do, we can use these predictive analytics tables or features to actually identify these very large outliers and just pluck them out of our data. So we can pull them out and see where are they coming from, understanding that the data has a certain range of values and that we might need to review these values. So what we're saying here basically is this value of 25,000, it's extremely high compared to all the other values that the facility has reported. Now, we don't need to do, it's not really giving us a trend analysis of any kind. That was why I went through these other tables, just to kind of show you where it was pulling that out of. But we can use these features to identify these outliers. And we kind of set the formula, basically, for it to be able to pull these values out and display this. So this is just an irregular pivot table, which would mean we could put this on a dashboard. And every month we could see those really high values, if there are any. You can see in some cells they're blank, meaning that I don't have this really suspiciously high outlier that I've detected using this feature set, right? And then maybe I don't have to worry for that month, depending on what you're looking at. But these other values, you might want to find out the source of them, where they're coming from, if it maybe was a simple data entry error, if it was something else, right? And it can help us with that investigation. Okay. Another example of using these predictive tools is by creating thresholds for our data values. So in DHIS2, you can create a validation rule. You might just compare to two data items that you're currently reporting on. But you might also want to detect if the value is very high in comparison to some previous trends. You can also use the WHO data quality tool, which I'll discuss in a moment. The issue with that tool, however, is you can't place any of those items on the dashboard, right? So the theory here is basically we can calculate those thresholds based on similar formula to WHO, or if you have other formula that you want to use, there's quite a broad range and spectrum of statistical calculations that you can use to calculate these thresholds. So if you want to be able to detect these on a routine basis, because you could insert this into validation rules as well and say, is the value I reported greater than or less than the threshold for that value based on the formula that I've entered inside of DHIS2. This is just showing a comparison of what an extreme outlier would be considered to be based on. None of these are exceeding the red bar is the reported value, the green bar is the threshold, so none of them are being exceeded necessarily in this case. But you're able to then generate those thresholds and use those for a variety of purposes in the different visualizations we showed. You could show graphs where you compare, like I'm showing now. You could run validation analysis, like I showed in the previous slide. So there's a lot of ways you can use these various thresholds through this predictive analytics feature that kind of really enrich your ability to pluck out these data values that are problematic and review information in a more timely basis, and especially put all of this on the dashboard, because then you can just make a dashboard and you can train your staff to review that dashboard in a routine manner and investigate these values further. So a number of the features I talked about are also covered by the WHO data quality tool. The challenge here, of course, maybe you're aware of this tool or maybe you're not, But the WHO data quality tool it's a custom application built on top of DHIS2, but it only works inside the application itself. So you're not able to extract any of the outputs that the tool produces and put it on a dashboard. You have to go inside the tool and run the analyses each time. So the training requirement for this tool, it's a little bit high, right? We can't create outputs that people can share. So everything I showed up until now, we can put that on a dashboard, we could put it in guidance documents, etc., and we could train people on it, and it's probably a little bit easier to do, right? So where I would recommend this complements is for these larger analyses, these larger kind of reviews of data. Of course, you can train people to use it on a monthly basis or more routinely. It's completely possible, but it's if I had to prioritize capacity, right? This tool is quite large in scope, can do a lot of different things, but you have to know how to use it every time you log into it. Otherwise, there's nothing really pre-configured for you as such. Okay, so the WHO data quality tool looks at 4 different measures based on the WHO data quality framework. This is completeness and timeliness of data, internal consistency of our data, external consistency. So this would be, for example, comparing your data with another source, maybe a DHS survey or a mixed survey or some other survey tool that you performed data collection on, as well as consistency of population estimates. So I know denominators is always a problem for everybody, basically in the world, right? So it's also just comparing your various denominators and seeing if this is a problem. Now, a lot of this we can do using the tools I already showed, but you know, there are some other functionality, additional functionality that is here within this tool. So here's an example on completeness. So we get scores. That is one thing kind of unique to the WHO tool. So I showed you examples of completeness and timeliness before, but in the WHO tool, we get these kind of scores based on the thresholds that are set. Now, once again, someone configures this application after it's installed on your DHIS2 system. So any of these thresholds, they can be modified, but we try to keep these quite high. Otherwise, the scores are maybe a little biased. But then we get scores basically, in this case, I've done it for a couple different data sets, and we're getting the overall score basically to determine, you know, how well the reporting is on that data set. So this goes a little bit beyond than just looking at the reporting rates every month, right? It's actually giving us some type of measure of quality. And the same is true for timeliness. So we set a threshold of what we think is timely. Of course, we do this in DHIS2 as well. That's how we're able to obtain all the various charts and everything related to timeliness. But we get a score once again for each of our different data sets that kind of helps us determine, you know, what's going on. If there's a really problematic data set, if people are just not submitting the data on time. So for internal consistency, so you might not be as familiar with this term, but really something like the validation rules that is often measuring internal consistency, where you're comparing, you know, 2 variables that are reported within the same system essentially. So maybe you have two variables on your malaria data set or 2 variables on your ANC data set, whatever it might be, and you're comparing those variables. So that's all this measure is really talking about. There are a number of features within the WHO data quality tool that support the review of this specific principle. And once again, you get this score at the end for each of these values. I know it's quite hard to see. The slides are online at least, so you can download them. But I apologize, the screen is not as good as the one in the bigger hall. But you get a score for all of this, and it allows you to kind of have some more idea of what is happening with your consistency. And there's a number of consistency measures that are there. So you're able to compare consistency over time. You're able to compare different values and if they're consistent with one another. There's a lot you can do. But once again, you know, maybe this is less of a routine measure. It is harder to train people to do this on a routine basis. So external consistency, this is another one that I talked about. And here what we have is we're comparing 2 different denominators in the same system. So this often happens, right? Where you have 2 denominators, they're the same value. You know, maybe one is, coming from one program and one is coming from another program. So for example, here we have ANC1 coverage. And this one is comparing basically the routine ANC1 coverage from DHIS with a demographic and health survey. Okay, so it's just seeing how far are those values from each other. Of course, you need the values from your survey inside of DHIS to perform this analysis, but you are able to take this data from different sources and compare and contrast them to see if there's a wide gap. And if there is a large variation, then you know which one is accurate or not. Because often many people will fight for the survey results, of course, but the idea is to show them that you're collecting data routinely. There is some impetus, some strength behind the data that you are routinely working with. This is a bit more difficult to set up, of course, but because you need all that data from your surveys. But of course, you can select subsets, pieces of information that you want to compare to perform this analysis. Okay, and the last one was consistency of population estimates. So sorry, I kind of started talking about this earlier, then switched over. But this is comparing denominators from two different programs. One is from the HMIS, one is from the EPI program, and it's looking at population less than 1. So sometimes we have this issue where inside of DHIS2, there are many denominators. Valeria gives some denominator, EPI will give one, and they're all different. None of them are the same value. So which one do you use in which calculation? How can you be sure that your coverages or your incidence rates or any of your other indicators are correct? So this is what this is trying to evaluate, if there's a significant difference between all these different indicators, and if so, to what degree does this affect the quality of the different data that I'm reviewing? Of course, it's better if you can to collapse and just have one denominator, but in many cases, that's not the case. So there's a lot you can do with this tool, and we have a very long introduction and tutorials on how to use this if you are interested. But once again, like I said, because the capacity requirement for this is quite high, there are a number of other tools that I've been showing you that are just directly within DHIS2. And the advantage is, of course, once you set those up and place those on a dashboard, it can be a little bit easier to train people how to utilize those on a much more routine basis. If you're reporting your data monthly, then you're able to review all of these different pieces of information on a monthly basis. The WHO data quality tool you can still use on a monthly basis as well. It's just the requirement is a little bit higher to use it, but it does offer some features that maybe are not always there. But a number of those features are there already. They can be placed on a dashboard, and where possible, I suggest to keep it simple, as simple as you can. So if there are any questions about these features, of course, I'm happy to, we can have a bit of a small discussion now. But I know I just kind of showed screenshots and things like that. If you're kind of interested more in, how they're actually used or how you implement them, feel free to talk to any of us. We can spend more time on that. But for now, I'll just ask if there are any questions about anything I presented at the moment. All straightforward. Thanks.
Question. Thank you. This application, this is WHO's application. Could it be downloaded and also installed? Yes.
So that's a good question. So yeah, the WHO data quality tool is just an additional application installed on top of DHIS2. So you can download it from the DHIS2 App Store. I can show you directly, but for anybody else who has that question, yes, you do have to configure the tool once you install it, but it works with any DHIS2 system essentially. So,
say configuration, such what configuration?
So the configuration for the tool, you'd be defining what your outliers mean. What is an extreme outlier? Is it 2 standard deviations? Is it 3 standard deviations away? What are your quality thresholds for things like reporting rates, for timeliness? All of those kind of statistical measures that you're kind of measuring against. The tool has some pre-configured notion of what that is, but you also have to determine what data elements and what indicators you want to actually evaluate this against. Which data sets do you want to evaluate? None of that is pre-configured because every DHIS2 configuration will have different metadata, essentially, different configurations. So you have to tell it, What do I define an extreme outlier as? What are the threshold values? What are the indicators I want to evaluate? What two items do I want to compare? Yeah, it gives you some suggestions, but those are modifiable. Yeah.
Data validation notification is work for the eye capture or aggregate capture. Yeah.
You're from Laos, I guess? Yeah. Okay, we use iCapture too in Vanuatu. So validation rules are a core feature inside of DHIS2. So for iCapture, it depends. If it's an event program, okay, then you have a different functionality called program rules, and you can use those in a similar way to check your event data. For the aggregate data in iCapture, validation rules and notifications will work. If you're aggregating your event values, then you can also use validation rules and notifications. So if you want to compare numbers in your event programs, you can still use this functionality. Yeah, it just depends if it's individual data or if you're kind of taking the numbers. So you're adding up different events within your program. But you can still use it in iCapture. Yeah, with iCapture data, I should say. Any other questions? See you discussing amongst yourselves. Not a problem. Okay, so if there are no more questions, I'll hand it over to my colleague Pamela, and he'll just kind of go over some more practical considerations on implementing these tools. Okay. Okay, thanks, Tim. Actually, there's some questions online, so maybe we can take those as well.
Validation rules in Tracker in the same as in the end.
Okay. So the question was about validation rules in Tracker. So once again, to the online participant who's asked this question, two schools of thought there. So one is if you are comparing individual events or just individuals, patients or something like this, then you would use a concept called program rules. Okay. But if you're aggregating that Tracker data, so you're taking the number of patients that meet a certain criteria and comparing this to a number of patients that meet another criteria, then you can use validation rules and validation notifications. So it just depends on the data that you are analyzing at the time. So once again, for the individual records, each individual record, if you wanted to analyze something within that, you would use the concept of program rules. If you're analyzing many records together, a number of some kind, then you would use validation rules and validation notifications. Any other question? No. Okay. Okay, so thank you all for the questions and discussion. So yeah.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. I know it's not the best of times to do a presentation. So while we set this up, feel free to drink some water and get refreshed. Right. So what I'm planning to discuss in next 15 minutes or so, or maybe 20 max, is to discuss around the data quality and data use experiences from Sri Lanka. So again, this is not just data quality. And one thing I must emphasize is that I'm not going to explain any of the data quality features, functionalities which are there in DHIS2, which Surajit already did. But rather, I will be talking about some practical information, some implementation experiences and challenges, things like that. So if I start from where I left yesterday in the presentation on immunization, in that presentation, we specifically talked about routine immunization, right? But then some of you approached me and asked about the all the implementation around COVID in Sri Lanka, because there were like some articles that were written about how we started and during the pandemic how it was made possible. So some of that I'm planning to discuss today, but then again, nothing specific on immunization generally, but I will mention why and how it was it really made possible in Sri Lanka for us to roll out all these programs during the pandemic. It was mainly due to the various data quality and data use measures that we have been practicing over several years, right? So first of all, what do you think about data collection forms? And do you really feel that, like how the data collection forms are designed, and do you see any relationship with data collection forms and data quality? What do you think? Yes, no, it's something totally irrelevant. I mean, in DHIS2, we configure data quality, validation rules and stuff separately, and data collection forms, we design it separate. Like we design data elements and put them together. So it's totally two different things. Is that so? Yes, yeah, obviously, yes. But the thing is, it's not really the case, right? So in most of the countries that we support, we don't really collect data in digital format at the field level. Isn't that so? Like, I mean, it's really good that we have most of our colleagues from Asia region. So most of the issues and challenges that we see here are common to all of us, right? The way we implement, the challenges that we have, the complaints which are coming from the end users are very cultural and contextual, which is a good thing so that we can discuss. So the thing is this. So if we design forms in a less confusing way, right? And to, like when someone has to look at a paper form, which is like 10 pages long, and when we expect them to capture the data on paper forms and copy paste it into or write it or submit it on a digital format, the way we design, it always matters, right? So we should minimize and we should try and prevent errors that can happen. So I will be discussing some of these steps that we have taken long time back. So all the content that I'm showing here are a couple of years old, right? So what I want to highlight is doing these kind of measures a couple of years back really helped us build capacity at all the levels, which made us possible to implement digital technologies during the pandemic when we really could not reach out the district and field level much, right? We had some focal points, that's all, because we had to do things mostly online and rapidly. So first thing is, and also I must emphasize, like the use cases I'm taking in this presentation are mostly related to maternal and child health and nutrition. And so those two programs in the Ministry of Health, I must acknowledge for their support in providing all the screenshots and content. So the first thing is sometimes we do some identical kind of transformation when we are designing data entry forms. This is mainly for the existing paper formats which have been there for a couple of decades and well established. So here, when we try to introduce something digitally in DHIS2, we don't really try to change things too much so that end users will they might get confused and there might be too much of resistance again coming from the field and district level. Okay, so you have to be a bit more strategic when you are dealing with a well-established paper formats, right? So, for example, sorry about that. Anyway, so I was actually going to apologize to you because the content was in our local language, but now I have to apologize twice for the content plus the visibility. Sorry about that. But basically, like this is one paper format we had like about 14 pages long, but it was a well-established paper format. So the content, the data items, it has been finalized, right? So we had public health experts for decades. So they have done this process over and over again. So the data items, we didn't have to change anything much, but the way we customize DHIS2, because this 15-page form, when you put it in digital format, we should make sure people don't make mistakes. And we should also make sure that we don't bore the people, who have to collect and write these 15 pages and put it back again in DHIS2. We shouldn't make it too difficult. So this was when we designed this form. I'm sorry you may not really see it. So about 5-6 years back, when we designed this form, we kind of designed a custom aggregate form with vertical tabs, right? So we had to introduce that so that the presentation wise, when you see the form, it was like more appealing, and there was less chance of making errors when they are entering data. And then sometimes when we have systems which not well established workforce, so for example, this mental health system and the school health data that we collected in Sri Lanka and we digitized about in 2018. So those days we could actually review the paper-based formats, right, and make some suggestions because ministry again was kind of, they were accepting the feedback, right? So first what we did was, this is the kind of form that they had, right? With a lot of like completeness issues. So they were mainly so the main issue was like, see, we have a form, but people don't submit. But we have an MCH form, people do submit. So please put it into DHIS2 because MCH people were submitting and we had good completeness. So let's try to do it for mental health so people will submit, right? So it's not really the case. So there were some issues with the paper format also. So what we first did was to discuss with the ministry and kind of change the layout and the structure in which they collect the data. And also we kind of strategically made it in such a way it is not too different to the data collection forms that we are going to have in DHIS2. Of course, in DHIS2 we have this tab. Now here we are using horizontal tabs so that for layout wise, it is much, I mean, it's looking much better compared to having a very lengthy form. But then the data elements and the data items, how it is ordered, is the same to what we had in this modified paper format. And also, this again is something similar in the same form. And sometimes we also get requests where we don't really have paper formats, right? Especially when we introduce new data forms. So we have more opportunity for us to get actively engaged with the ministry in designing the paper format as well as in the meantime when we design the system. So we had this MNH indicator form which was newly introduced. So for that, we actually could design a paper format where, again, this is an event program that we had to create. So we had the opportunity to create both the paper format and the DHIS2 customization at the same time. So we had more flexibility, right? So what I'm trying to emphasize is, like when you are assigned a DHIS2 customization or your job is mostly on, like supporting DHIS2, yeah, I mean, try to kind of have a better engagement with the ministry and try to explain them like it's not really, like digitizing a content, but there's a lot more that you can do to increase the data quality overall, right? So thing is like you have to optimize your paper formats and you have to optimize your workflow, and finally you have to think about the DHIS2, right? Just applying DHIS2 validation rules will not really help, right? And also, this of course is from 2015. So when we had to design some custom Android applications for collecting nutrition data, one issue they had was that when they were capturing this height and weight values, they wanted it to be, like validated rather than validated. It's like comparing it with this WHO standard deviation values and give a kind of visual prompt where the height and weight value stands as per normal criteria, right? So for that, what we actually did those days was to kind of change the background color of the data entry form. So here you can see it is green, meaning like it's probably between -1 to +2 SD standard deviations, right? We all know these growth records where you have these color bands and all. So the same thing, this was a request that came from the field level, and we had a, lot more flexibility in designing the application. So we tried to capture at the level of data capture, give a visual verification of where the data lies, so that to prevent any accuracy related issues that can happen while capturing the data. So the same thing we are highlighting there as a visual verification. And sometimes, so basically like what I have been summarizing in last 5 minutes or so is like we should, really target on paper formats, and we should cause minimal disturbance to service providers, because then there will be a lot of resistance coming from the end user level, right? So we have to be strategic when we are designing forms. We have to think of data quality as well as do it in such a way that there's maximum compliance from the ministries. And also we have to think about the infrastructure related issues, like, so when we collect very lengthy forms, what happens when internet is not there, right? Or there may be disturbances for like 5-10 minutes. And again, when we are, like in ministries, in workflows, we have approval, right? So in DHS2 also, we have a data approval for aggregate. So we should use features like that also in DHS2. I mean, not just, like design the forms and capture data, because this data approval is a really nice feature which we have implemented in some programs, which is really helping the data, improving the data quality. Right. The next thing is about user trainings. Okay. So when you are conducting user trainings, I know all of you do. So what do you focus? So we all know that we focus on, like teaching people how to enter data and how to analyze data. These are core components. But data quality is something, I mean, we should not really think that. So sometimes I have seen proposals where you have, like, when you plan trainings, the first training is for aggregate data entry, right? So you have series of trainings, aggregate data entry, and then you have separate for analytics. And finally, after 1.5 years, you plan for data quality. Okay, but it ideally should not be like that. You should try to include some of the data quality related concepts in the trainings itself, even in the data capture trainings itself, right? It doesn't have to be trainings on WHO DQ app, but simple things like running validation rules. Sometimes it's because we are lazy in customizing systems. We try to launch something without, like putting in place all these things like validation rules, because it's easy for us. But if we try to do a proper job, I think we should try to design training programs which also includes some of the data quality features. Next thing, user manuals, right? So at least in the Asia region, I think user manuals is not a major issue, because in most of our countries, when we deliver something, you are expecting a very big user manual, right? By default, it's like that, at least 100 pages or something like that, right? So we all produce user manuals. I don't know how many of you, how many of the end users are referring it. But one thing that we do, especially in this particular program, is that we maintain the user manual. It's a living document, mind you, and you can, I don't know whether you can see. So here you have the version number, right? So ideally you should have a version number or some way to identify. It's not the same user manual that you produced or shared with the ministry in 2019, right? So try to do like that. Try to maintain a proper user manual which has updated content. And then the SOPs. So if you observe what is there, like here it is a checklist which we distributed to health facilities, which they have to kind of, we advise them to keep at the desk where they are entering data, or paste it on the wall where you are having your laptop, so that it kind of highlights some essential items that you have to check before submitting data, right? So sometimes we take it for granted after conducting the training program that people will be just entering data and doing all the validation checking and submit, right? We can, of course, make it compulsory to run validation rules. But the thing is, talking at a very generic level, we need to have SOPs in addition to user manuals and user guides, so that, and you have to make sure that people are practicing those, right? So you need to have these kind of documents, which are kind of checklists, so that when you enforce them, people will kind of learn to practice. This is a single page user guide. So I think even in most of the documents and resources shared by UIO during the pandemic had this. But in Sri Lanka, we were practicing these single pages from 2017. So this is a kind of a quick guide, right? Not too much text, but a lot of graphics where we keep next to the data entry desk, so that they can, like have a quick glance. In case if you have a new person, you don't have to go through this entire big user document, but the single pages for the tasks. So we maintain them, especially in the MCH related programs, for a very long time. And it was really helping us during the pandemic, when we had to train people within couple of hours of online training. Same here. And of course, we use some remote desktop technologies again for a few years, because some of the facilities we can reach online, but reaching them on site is terribly difficult, right? So for them, we are using several remote desktop technologies. And Using them, of course, really helps, because sometimes if they don't have support, they just submit. Otherwise, simply if they have good support, they will feel like asking, getting things clarified before submitting. So even for them, we had SOPs. And this is a kind of a user support mechanism. I know most of your countries are having a user support mechanism, but we try to make it more structured, which has a couple of layers of support. So one layer which sits very closely to the end users, and then gradually you have a kind of a higher level where you escalate matters. And finally you have a, here the tier 3 is about very technical matters where public health, CCP stands for consultant community physician. So that's kind of like the public health expert with a doctorate in Sri Lanka, where like you have very, so not, these people don't get, they may maximum get 1 or 2 queries per month. And then we have health informatics experts, but other than that, this tier 1 and 2, they'll be solving most of the user related issues. Right, and then we had this, we still have this data use or data review meetings. So these meetings are super important, because this is where people discuss the data that they collect. And this is where actually the data become information, right? So these should not happen at national level. These should actually happen at all the levels. So when it comes to MCH, maternal and child health, we have it at PHM, stands for Public Health Midwife, which is the field level. And then we have other subnational levels all the way up to the country level. So we have these review meetings at different frequencies. Of course, at field level, we have it more frequent, monthly. But at country level, it's kind of biannually. So here what you are seeing is a field level review. Of course, you have Yon also here, not just us. This is one program he participated. So this is what happened in these meetings. So they discuss so many administrative issues, as well as they discuss the data they have collected. But the problem is, how do we guide them? How do we make them aware like what they should be looking at in these meetings? So one strategy that we use is to provide support for the review meetings. So after deploying DHIS2 in the MCH domain, you can tell, okay, these are the areas you should discuss. But going one step further, what we did was, in our DHIS2 dashboards, we created some dashboards. Now, if you can see these dashboard items, see here, the MCH review 2021, slide 6, 2021, slide 7. So what these people actually do is, in these data review meetings, they are supposed to prepare a PowerPoint and present it so that everyone can see and comment, right? So to facilitate the matter, what we did was, we just created some dashboards in DHIS2 with some template favorite items. So they are just supposed to download them and put it in the PowerPoint, because we try to change them, like don't use PowerPoint, just use DHIS2, but it's not that easy, right? It's commonly in the region. It's sometimes they have been practicing things for too long. It is not too easy, but it was much easier for us to create these dashboards and ask these people to download these dashboards and use them for data review, right? So this is what we have been using, and they have been doing it for now several years. And this was super useful. I will come back to that during the pandemic, because they really knew what they should be doing. So this again is another slide. And then these are the kind of regional or subnational level review meetings. We kind of have it in quarterly basis. And then this is a national level where when it comes to national level, most of the data is clean, right? So these meetings are mostly conducted to identify some cross issues. And of course, some of these meetings are even targeted to see how we are aligning with the strategies, right? So because when it comes to this level, most of the data quality issues have been addressed. And what happened during the pandemic? So we talked about this field level, subnational level, country level, big gatherings, right? Physical meetings. And during the pandemic, these were not possible. But the data, because we had to provide health services, so how do we ensure data quality, and how do we make sure people were actually using this data? Because we had all these measures in place, It was just a matter of changing where we are present, right? So rather than on site, what we did was to shift online. Okay, but it was not so difficult because we had all the slides required for these review meetings on DHIS2. So what we all had to do was, people had the laptops, they had the internet. Zoom, some of them, at least, I mean, one person from field level knew, right? So we didn't really have too much trouble in training someone on how to use Zoom. So using these online telecommunication services, able to conduct the same review meetings, in fact, with much more efficiency and cost effectiveness, right? So because otherwise national people or provincial people will have to travel to districts, right, physically, which is like taking 2 to 3 days with the accommodation, like first day traveling, second day meeting, third day traveling again, right? So you lose 3 days just for one day work. But with this, of course, some people don't like it because now they can't travel. But however, this was really useful and we were able to conduct this even during the pandemic. And this slide, of course, is from one of research publication articles Sops mentioned. So this was looking at how much of nutrition data was entered during the pandemic. So you can see, you actually can't see, sorry. So here from, I think from March to July, so here we are kind of looking at one district called Jaffna. It's in northern part of Sri Lanka. It's in post-conflict state. We are looking at how much of nutrition-related events were recorded in DHIS2. So you see this sudden dip here because that was a curfew, complete lockdown, right? No services provided. But the good thing is, just after the curfew, we went back to this new normal, and it continued during the 2020, right? It was at a lower level because the health service delivery was somewhat reduced because of like health staff getting engaged in so many other activities. But the data kept coming on, which was a good thing. So that was made possible due to all these attempts around data quality and data use. That's what we wanted to highlight, and more about that available in this research article. And also, we asked everyone to see our DHIS2 dashboards, but in this region, we have to have some physical publications, right? So these are the things ministries have been doing for like decades. So they still have to have these paper publications, and these publications continue. It's the only change that happened is most of the content keeps coming from DHIS2, right? So for us to do that, the quality of the data has to be at very high level. So, but thankfully to all these resources and commitment of the health staff, we have been able to do so. Right. Final 2 or 3 slides. So now shifting back from all this work that was done in the past to the current context. So now we are talking about COVID-19, right? So as some of you are aware, Sri Lanka has one of the largest COVID-19 tracker programs from day one because we pre-registered virtually the entire adult population into DHIS2. So we have a population of 21 million. Out of that, initially 16 plus millions were registered, pre-registered in the DHIS2 from day one of vaccination program, right? So it's one of the large scale tracker programs. I mean, it was the largest kind of course, largest in Sri Lanka at that time. So after implementing this with all these millions of vaccination events and attributes and stuff, we kind of did a review to identify some aspects of data quality. This was done a couple of months back, in fact, May 2022. So what we found out was that we had overall completeness of 87% of data in our tracker program. And of course, the completeness varied between the doses, right? So for first dose that time, it was 89.8, second dose 83, and third dose 78. So it was actually comparing of number of actual dose given from, which is coming from a different source, not from the tracker, with the data that was reported in the tracker, right? So completeness was around that. And then interestingly, we also looked at timeliness, right? So in this large scale tracker, we are looking at how much of data was entered real time. What do we mean by real time? Means in the vaccination center, people are actually entering data into the tracker program. Mind you, these are mobile vaccination centers. Not really sometimes in the health centers. These may be in temples, like schools and places like that. So we noted that close to 30% of the data was entered on the same day. So this analysis is not actually coming from DHIS2. If you want to know how we did it, you can contact Chatura, our lead developer. So he knows how we did it. But it was actually we got the data results out from the database itself. So we noted that 30% of the data was entered real time, same day, and 30 plus 10, at least about 40% of the data was entered at least within 2 days. So what does that mean? So probably this 10% may have captured data on paper format, went back to the health center and entered data, right? So, but that was good enough. Data coming within 48 hours. So we had about 40% of the data coming within 48 hours, which was okay for a tracker instance. That's what we felt based on the context of the country. But altogether, if you look at the data that we had in the system within 2 weeks, it went all the way up to 66%, right? So we have 40 here and another 25 there. So 2/3 of the data of this tracker instance was there in DHIS2 within 2 weeks of the actual vaccination event. So which I believe was very good given the context of the country with the lockdown and all resource limitations. But then again, we definitely had challenges. There were some facilities which with very low resources, infrastructure, and all, and so many other different admin challenges where the data took very long time to reach the DHIS2 based system. So I also encourage all of you to do some data quality assessments around tracker implementations, because the thing is this, right? There is too much of drive from partners and ministries to go for tracker, but the thing is, ensuring data quality and using the data in tracker is again something that you will have to think about, and we don't have too much of evidence and research available on tracker aspect of it, right? So this is something I know all these countries are implementing tracker, so something that you can also think about. So I'm going to stop there. Any questions, if any? Yeah.
For the data quality in experience, we find
Right. Okay, thank you. We find about the duplication data. So how you find that problem or not? If you find the problem duplication data, how you solve that? That's it. For me, to track reverse, we have experience. Sometimes one tracer input the data twice, three times.
Yeah, good question. So, in fact, like one of the reason why we wanted to this kind of analysis is to identify all these issues that we have. So again, this 20 million that we have identified there are some data which are duplicated. Sometimes it's not really DHIS2's problem, because we also found out. One good thing, it's again very contextual. In Sri Lanka, we have a national ID, which everyone has, right? So that, when we are using the national ID as a unique identifier, there is very limited chance that you can have the same person registered twice. But then again, um, yeah, like we had challenges beyond our DHIS to setting a unique identifier, because there were some issues with the existing systems related to identity issue also, where we found some duplicates. And in addition, there were some areas we identified that there has been some like some manipulations of data. So one good thing, the more we understood that there are duplicates, the more effort that we had to put in place, like audits and all, to see how the data has been manipulated, when it was changed, who update, things like that. But out of all this data also, we have identified some duplicates. Now actually Chatura and the team is currently, one thing that they are working on is to identify these duplicates and getting rid of them. So one good thing is, when you are setting it up, you should always try to foresee there can be duplicates, and try to implement measures like unique identifiers. But if you are working in a country where one unique identifier is not possible, then you will have to, one is a tech aspect where you can, like have a combination of them. The other thing is to train people and put measures in place to, like have regular supervisions and identify any duplicates. But this is a challenge, and I think this is one major discussion even happening at your University of Oslo, where I mean, how are we going to deduplicate data in Tracker? So there's a lot of work ahead. Thanks for raising that question. Any more questions? If not, yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Good. I still say so nobody will be sleepy because after lunch we always sleepy. Okay. The first time I introduction myself. I know today go we meet in a room or a resto, but today I will be introduction myself. My name is Lian. I'm from Indonesia. My role in Indonesia is support my teams for implementation DS2 or a coordination with the Ministry of Health and then make the planning for implementation program. So this is the one program have a good story and bad story. So I just want to share because we know today, 3 day, we discuss more technical, and now I just want to share not very technical, just the story how we find like before I say duplicate data, how we can solve that. We use the unique identity and then the many feature in the DS2 are very helpful. Okay, this is the outline. I hope everyone will see. But the first time I'll be tell about the background why COVID in Indonesia use the DS2, and then the second the indicator, how much the indicator, how much the metadata we use because you will be find good story because we have many metadata, many indicator, but we can simplify more simple to the indicator. And then problem of the data. How many we implementation this tool for the COVID the 3 years, and we find many things about the what Nick explained before and the storytelling about the descent form is uh, a good one's experience because we use that. Okay, and then system contact tracing, a little different with the yeah many our friend in here like the Sri Lanka or the other country because we customize these two combined with the other application and integration with the many system in Indonesia ministry the other ministry. Okay, the first story. We know COVID changed everything in Indonesia. Almost all will be pushed to digital. We meet in meeting and with Zoom or something like that. So in November 2000, I think it's 2002. It's 2000, 2 years ago. I say 2 years ago. Yeah, the November 2 years ago. We're starting with Excel, but not very helpful because we want to tracing. We analyze many things with Excel. Yeah, Excel powerful, but if you combine with the many data like the home vaccination and then how many people close contact, because there's two in Indonesia use for the close contact, how many for the child, something many. So that's why we use the DS2 because it's the more easy to install and customize. That's the starting first, and then we create many model application. The first we use tracker capture tracker in the DS2, and we have 10,000 puskesmas. We call it puskesmas, a public health office in there in Indonesia, 10,000, and then you can calculate. I think it's 50,000 user the first time. So many user can use this tool the first time because they say user, then something like that. So like the before Sri Lanka say, we design the form, we create on the system more the simple what they can use, where they can use. So, but the DS2 will be the back end. So everything data from the front end we create with the if technical is React.js, and then for the mobile we use the Flutter, push to DS2 for analysis. That's the one story. With DS2 you can customize many things. You can create as the backend analysis data. Okay, so our user, we have a for the national. This is not only Ministry of Health, but we have the top level like our president to use the data because they want to make the decision making, the policy brief. And then the other ministry like the economy ministry too, because they need calculation how many money they will be spent for the vaccination or for the program. So the national use these two not only in Ministry of Health, and then we have a user district. We have how many Masali? 80,000 district, and every district have two person, one for the data person, one for program person. So we have big user, and then public health office. What I said before, we have 10,000 public health office in Indonesia for the 30 now 37 before 35 provincy. And then we have the volunteer. Is the because COVID is Indonesia is very worse. We have many cases, so we have volunteer from the police, for the military, for the academics, many for university. So the calculation our user is, if you look, so many. Until now we have 200, I think 200. And for the active user, you can look in 18,000 user active now. This is the base today. I get the data today. And yeah, before we capture the user, use the order system because we need understanding how many people in every province. This is the related with the planning for the budget too. So this is just story before we go to data quality because the point of the story is how we handle for many user, 80,000 per second. So access our application. Okay, and go. So this is the process. In here we have the tracer. The tracer is someone collection data in the field. Visit the who person in close with the how with the people positive COVID close contact. The close contact. We have the health worker, every public sector. We have the kader is the name of the volunteer for every village in Indonesia. So we have one kader for every village. So they have to collection the data, the person. And then we have military. We have police and military have to collection the data almost 2 years. And then we have the other volunteer like from the school, university, and more. So they put they input the data with the other application, but the push to the S2. The application, this is we create with for the mobile, so they can use their own phone, or we try use the WhatsApp before, but not very effective for data quality. So we done for the WhatsApp because many people just put and always wrong for put the data. Okay, and we have the second layer. This is more like the people have decision maker. So we have in public health officer in the district level, and sorry, public health office, the first people will be review the data. That's will be the next slide, how we maintenance or how we review data with them. And then we have the district health office. District health office only can access the data analysis. So I want to show this because we have a problem with the user role. Before we give all our user access for the view and edit, and that will be worse. Every people can delete the analysis, the dashboard, everything. So we split. The first tracer only can access for input the data, and the second layer only can view for the visualization. So that's the we do in Indonesia because we find the one problem. And then we have a provincial health office only, so they district the data. And then we have the Minister of Health. Minister of Health can show every province level until level 4 for the public health office. Okay. Okay, we have 54. It's correct. Yeah, indicator it for, and then we have the metadata. But the problem now we sharing about the what we find the problem. This is the related with the what Nick mentioned before, how to use the like the sample validation rule or maximum and minimum. Okay, we find too many variable to be get because the first time they need for the identity person like the name, age, uh, all the data. Yeah, we know we need that for the analysis more deep. So what the solution for that? Next the slide. We have identity number typing error. This the what I mentioned before. Our friend in Sri Lanka, the error because they wrong to put the number, and then manual collection number. This is the phone number because we need the phone number for if the positive we can call and go to the home. Okay, and then manual calculation complete the case so much. So in tracker capture, if you remember before this morning session, you saw complete, not delete. So we make it our script for the manual, for automatically complete that data. And then data completeness, this is the one problem we find because for the one tracer need to find 14 people in one day that in 2 years ago. Okay, too many systems to record and the same data. We find this one, we have 5 for the system and collect the same data in other Ministry of Health, internal Ministry of Health too. Okay, what our solution is we use I think the first is data validation. We use this one. For the solution for unique identity, we integration with our others ministry of the what we call it, Masali? Yeah, civil registry. We integration, so we don't need to input many data again, like the personal, like the name. Only they just put the unique identity and get all the data, like the age, number, and then where they live, and then many things in there. Yeah, the first is complicated because the other ministry, so we need to make like NDA for the integration. So, but this is very helpful to uh, to solve the one problem is error typing unique and then the one's duplication. The duplication we find many of them, not only duplication, they put 4 times the same names before. Yeah, different Unix number, but the same name. So that's why we integrate with the other ministry to validation the data. So if the ready in the server, not can put again. Okay, rule validation. This is the unique in Indonesia. 18 user have the problem about the digital iteration. So they always wrong to make the date format, like the birthday, and then the last time they close with the someone of positive. This we find that. So we create the one is, yeah, integration is the one solution, and then second is the in the days two we have the validation rule for the dates too. That's why we use that. And then rule validation for text format. This is unique. If you visit Indonesia, you will be find many people just put the number by text, like the A, B, C, something like that. So we use the validation rule for a number font too by only number. That's the we do because 80,000, so many not clear data. One, I think it's 6 months for many story we get. And then yeah, age, like I say before, they we are only put for I think it's number, but they always use the something else, like the unique, like the symbol, something like that. So we do like the validation rule in English too. Okay. Um, this is. Okay. I think it's the video. I think this video, but it's okay. Will be share what we do in the application. Okay. This is the validation rule. The same like I say before. Can we go? Okay. Data cleaning method. This is I want to relate it what Nick say before and what our friend in Sri Lanka do it. So we have the visualization to analyze the data. This is the one the example like I can sorry. Okay, like the first indicator is how many confirmation for the COVID and how many close contact. And what we do, I want just bold how with the process combined with the one is the training, one is the SOP we do, one is the method in this two for the data like the outlier or something else. Okay, we have the help desk. Help desk is the person in charge in the every puskesmas to validation the data. So they have responsibility for the check the every data before we publish to public. So 1 week before publish, there will be analysis. So helpdesk will be check the anomaly data. The first time is very hard. So every 2 weeks, we together with them, like creating the meeting online. So discuss every day data. Yeah, we have 35 provinces so hard, but we do that, and then now they can do alone. So we do like basic project because if we give the theory or the manual book, it's not success in Indonesia. They will never read that. So we do is give the project, or we mentoring in the online together. We check the every data, the example, how many outlier data, how many data not completeness. The example, the completeness. We do creating one dashboard table. If you saw this, we have one table, how many not have the close contact. So they will be checked. They will be checked based the date too. We have in here the date they put the data, and then in here how many contact tracing they have. If zero or NA, it means they're not yet to put the data. So we do that together in online meeting. Okay. So this is I think the okay. this is the ones way to do in the tracker capture. If they don't have if they have close contact, we'll be checking tracker capture. It's really they not yet put or something error in the system. So we do and repeat the process, and then now they can do alone and teach the friends if they move someone else. Okay, I think okay. After data clean, they publish every week to open dashboard. This is you can access the from the Vietnam too, because we not the close the order Indonesia for the APA. So this is the open dashboard can access by everyone to look the how the COVID status in Indonesia. This is the from Ministry of Health and join with the many data in Ministry of Health, like the vaccination or something else. And then this is the last, the data use, like the mentioned Sri Lanka. After 1 week, we make the publication, which one district will be level 1, level 2, level 3, and level 4, based, based our data from the system. I think this is the last, because I looked so many, yeah, the last slide. Thank you very much. I hope the very clear for everyone. Back to our, any question? Any question? Okay, thank you.
Okay, everyone, we'll take our break. I believe the tea's in the larger room, yeah? So we'll just head over there, grab your tea, and we'll come back in 20 minutes.